Welcome, everybody, here to the White House for a very important milestone as USAID releases its agency-wide policy on countering trafficking in persons. This is a very, very exciting day. I'm Samantha Power from the National Security Council here at the White House, President's Advisor on Human Rights and Multilateral Affairs, and I'm joined by a dream team on fighting trafficking in persons and protecting people around the world, and I'll introduce each of them as they speak. This is a day really above all for Administrator Raj Shah and his team to highlight the fantastic work that has gone into this policy. The terrific advocates and others who are gathered around the table have done a huge amount to counter trafficking, and we're very honored to have them with us. I will turn the podium over to Raj momentarily, but I just wanted to say a few words about the Obama administration's and the president's personal commitment to countering human trafficking, and just say a little bit about a few of the challenges that I think lie ahead. We have an occasion this year, of course, with the 150th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation to really amplify and highlight the work that many of you are doing around the world to counter this horrible evil. And it's a useful occasion to reflect both on how far we've come in 150 years, but obviously when you just see the statistic of 12 to 27 million persons trafficked, you have, I think, two observations. One, those are huge numbers, and every one of those statistics is a person denied their freedom and their dignity. But number two, so there's also a wide gap in that 12 to 27 million. So it also shows you how obscure this space is and how hard it is to get in and to really know the scale of the challenge and thus the best interventions in order to contest that challenge. We're going to hear a lot about this administration's international efforts and then open it up for dialogue with the experts around the table and the advocates around the table. But just to focus or to highlight a few things that are being done on the domestic space, because part of what this administration has tried to do is really broaden the linkages and enhance the synergies between our domestic agencies on the one hand and then people like Raj and Lou from USAID and state on the other. Lou, of course, comes to us from a law enforcement background, and we've increased, as many of you know, trafficking-related prosecutions and created, I think, pretty innovative links among federal, state, and local law enforcement bodies. Multiple federal agencies are enhancing their public awareness building, and I think we've had real success just using the one metric of the call volume to the National Trafficking Hotline. You can see the degree to which people are really drawing on the resources that the government is making available. There's more that can be done for sure. But also, given that this is a transnational effort, as much as it is domestic, we're partnering with the private sector and with faith communities to grow a common understanding of how forced labor can exist within supply chains and what businesses and consumers can do to stop it. And we welcome any additional ideas you have, because often 1,000 flowers are blooming out there outside the bubble of the U.S. government, and we would really welcome ideas about what more we can do to use our convening power and our platform here at the White House and across the U.S. government to enhance these partnerships. As I mentioned, I just want to make three very quick points before handing it over to Raj, just in terms of what I think this strategy, three of the points that as I read this strategy over the last couple of days sort of stood out to me. One, I think President Obama has said from day one that the United States' best leadership in the realm of human rights and certainly in the realm of trafficking is the example that we set at home. And I think that one of the things that USAID put in place, actually now more than a year ago, is the very high ethical standards as it relates to people who are contracted by USAID, people who work for USAID, people who are in fact the faces of the U.S. government. And I think one of the things we're thinking through is what more we can do in that area to build on USAID's model, recognizing that if we ourselves were clean and if we had embedded the kind of standards and monitoring and metrics and so forth, that in turn would be a great tool and a great platform from which to go to other governments and to go to other companies and so forth to build on that model. So we want to build on this code of conduct, and again, very impressed by the way in which USAID has adopted for all of its employees, contractors, subcontractors, and grantees, this ethos basically of being a model in this space. So that's, I think, foundational. Second, it goes without saying that what we most need to do is to mainstream attention to this set of issues across the government and not have kind of dedicated silos that do trafficking. Much as we love our trafficking office and the work that they do, as we head into the fourth year of this administration, we're giving a lot of thought across the board to how we embed our commitments into the DNA of the U.S. government across the board. So that this countering trafficking is not seen as somebody's job or somebody else's job, but rather is seen as part of the daily standard operating procedure across the board. And here I just note, and we have Carla Capel and Don Steinberg here with us, and Sarah Mendelson, and people who did a huge amount of work in this space as well, but it's very gratifying to see counter-trafficking embedded in the National Action Plan on Women, Peace, and Security. So you can see if we have other venues, other framings, other chapeaus, that's still a space in which the trafficking, counter-trafficking priorities should be reflected. And I think in the National Action Plan, you can see that, and it's truly impressive. And again, a credit to the people who worked on that plan around this table. And then lastly, before handing to Raj, the one thing we know about global human trafficking, as I indicated in referring to the statistic that is out there, is how much there is that we don't know. And I'd like to commend USAID for making this point plain in its strategy that it's rolling out today. And of course, Raj does this all the time across many, many sectors, but emphasizing the importance of improving data collection and learning in order to make more informed investment decisions going forward. And one of the things that stands out, because it's very encouraging and very intriguing in this plan, is that Raj and his team note that 5 of the top 6 countries in which USAID has invested funding since 2001 have improved their rankings in the State Department's annual report. And that's great, and one can draw correlative links, but what we don't really know, we're not entirely sure about, is what are the factors that actually give rise to those improvements. And just the very fact that that is flagged in the report, I think, is a tribute to, again, to Raj's overall approach here, always emphasizing the importance of getting beyond easy correlations and then, into the data to understand better how we can use our resources as effectively as possible. And I know this is something Lou has really prioritized from his perch as well. So with those 3 points, I'd like to turn the podium over to Raj Shah, the USAID administrator, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Sam. It's really great to be here with Samantha Power, who, as you know, fights for and represents human rights and human protection against vulnerability in the White House and across our administration every day. So the reason we have the opportunity to have this discussion at the White House, and as a clear demonstration of President Obama's strong commitment to protecting those who are vulnerable, is in large part due to Sam. So thank you for having us. And Ambassador Sidibaka has also been, as you know, a stalwart leader in this area and working very much in partnership, encouraging USAID to produce this strategy and to make trafficking a much more central component across a much broader area of work. And I'm pleased to be joined also by some of my USAID colleagues that know the depths of these issues and the challenges much more deeply, and they'll have a chance to talk through some of those insights. As we mentioned, 27 million people, men, women, mostly children, are essentially enslaved or in sex or labor exploitation on an ongoing basis. And just to put that in perspective, everyone around this table would recognize that's more than double the population of New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago combined. And that's really extraordinary. And we have to start with that number and with that understanding of the scale of the problem in order to measure and assess whether our efforts are in fact making a real difference. We know that trafficking thrives in those environments where poverty and conflict are rife. And we know statistically where that's going to be and geographically, so we can position ourselves to focus on the problem where it's most acute. We know that trafficking is a highly lucrative business. Some estimates indicate that it's a $32 billion a year business, and so addressing it will require tackling the business component of it as well. And we know what Samantha mentioned, that there's still quite a lot we don't know about which interventions, which approaches are most effective. And in many ways, this policy statement today and our issuance of the policy is really a first step towards committing significant additional resources, intellectual energy, network power to study and to ascertain what are the most effective ways to tackle this problem at scale in partnership with so many other colleagues around the U.S. government. Because we've lacked basic data around surveys and around how we map the problem, as a result of this policy, we will be asking every USAID mission in high-risk countries to conduct baseline surveys and develop clear metrics so they can assess progress against this work. It is really no longer good enough to simply indicate that the places where you're spending resources are doing better over time without really understanding the specific correlations that got you there. We also will refocus efforts in particular hotspots, places like DRC, Haiti, and Afghanistan, where we know in environments that follow disasters or conflict, we have to take extra efforts and in a much broader way to ensure that all of the things we do in those environments are informed with an eye towards preventing and precluding human trafficking. Because we've seen technology advance dramatically, perhaps one of the most transformational changes over the last 15 years in precisely the environments we're describing is the adoption of mobile phones and the spread of new technology. We're prioritizing investments to use that technology to effectively fight trafficking, mapping platforms and mobile phone apps. In one example, and this one is in Moscow, we've been working with the local organization to pilot a new mobile phone app that provides users with a literally map of interest with shelter information, hospitals and police stations located nearby, and includes an automated panic button that allows them to send information and alerts to preloaded emergency contacts. That may not sound like much, but the reality is making it easier for people to access help is a big component to helping people survive, as those of you around this table and those of you joining online know. Because we know that even in developed countries, we don't have appropriate databases or standardized internal systems, the policy will continue to encourage building out of integrated databases that allow us to track and support people who have been trafficked and recovering victims. In one example, we're helping 10 countries in Eastern Europe establish the world's first uniform online database for tracking and assisting victims. It operates in more than a dozen languages, safeguards victim identities, connects them to critical services like emergency care and legal aid. And we're working to make sure that we expand that network to additional countries like Hungary and Turkey that are now seeking partnership in that kind of an increasingly international system. And because we know that as an agency, we need to make sure that our actions and those of our partners reflect our own principles, we've adopted a code of conduct, as Samantha mentioned, to ensure that our personnel, our contractors, our security contractors, particularly in conflict environments, abide by the highest ethical standards to both report information that would appear to be high-risk situations and to themselves abide by a code of conduct that ensures that no one associated with U.S. government activities is involved in human trafficking. Let me share just a brief story about the impact that these efforts can have. I learned this recently and I find it just fascinating. For 3 years, a Cambodian boy and his 3 friends had essentially been enslaved on a Thai fishing boat and in a fishing community. Just a few weeks ago, their boat docked at a port in Thailand, and the young man happened to catch sight of an MTV documentary about trafficking. The video flashed a free hotline number in both Thai and Cambodian, so the men could read it. They called the number on the screen, and immigration authorities responded immediately, helping to free them and repatriate them back to Cambodia. This happy ending, and of course, for, as you all know, people that go through these processes don't have an immediate happy ending. They have to recover and ensure that they are not victims again. But this positive step forward was a result of a program we helped establish over a decade ago called MTV Exit. And through this partnership, which has leveraged now more than $100 million of media and access to communications, based off our initial investment of only $8 million, MTV Exit reaches 300 million households worldwide, mostly in Asia, and 650,000 every year in order to raise awareness. The 650,000, I think, is concerts, which is another great way to reach young people and raise awareness. But the point is that these things can work. Effective partnerships can leverage U.S. taxpayer dollars by reaching beyond the instruments of government and partnering with those who have real reach and scale. We can expand the impact and reach of our work. Because so much of the effort here is about increasing awareness and connecting people to resources that literally will help save their lives in many cases. Those are the types of partnerships we're recommitting to as part of this effort. And I want to conclude just by noting that this isn't just a task that the U.S. government is taking on. We recognize that there are universities and student groups around this country that have deep passion and commitment for this work. And we ask you to continue to innovate and come up with new ways to help create solutions that make a difference. We know there are faith-based communities around this country that have demonstrated really an extraordinary commitment to this work. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to visit Bethel University outside of Minneapolis, a member of the Christian College Consortium. Their 15 students chose to spend their winter holiday in Cambodia, learning about the risk of child trafficking and what they could do to help. Whether it is Shared Hope International, joining us here today, conducting assessments in Arizona, Washington, and Virginia to better understand the scope of trafficking in the United States, or Catholic Relief Services, one of our great partners that has worked after the tsunami in Asia and after the earthquake in Haiti to help protect children from trafficking in high-risk environments. The leadership of the faith community and the membership of institutions of faith around this country and around the world have a major role to play in this effort, and we're proud to be expanding those partnerships with you and with those communities to help reach more people and protect more children. So I hope this conversation continues to help us learn. The spirit of the policy is to capture new insights and new learnings to bring a rigor around evidence and understanding to a problem that deserves it, because ultimately we believe these challenges are solvable. But they're only solvable if we all come together, work in partnership, get beyond the mindset of government-only action, and genuinely partner to both study issues more clearly, understand what works, and expand our own efforts to reach more people and reach the actual scale of the problem, because it is a very human and a very profound one, and one that ultimately President Obama, Secretary Clinton, and this administration care profoundly about. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Raj, and we will again very soon open it up to hear some of those ideas from gathered around the table. But first, we'd love to hear from Ambassador Lou C. DeBaca on the State Department and the broader global efforts on countering trafficking in persons.
Thank you, Samantha, and thank you to Administrator Shaw. One of the things that we talk about in our diplomacy around human trafficking is that the responsibility to fight this crime rests squarely with governments, and that the spark that ignites that action is political will. The governments that translate that political will into results are those who put into place an effective whole-of-government approach, where watchwords are not silos or turf, but instead interagency and interdisciplinary. And that's, I think, what we're underscoring at this event today, not only the political will that exists at the highest levels of the U.S. government, but also the effective interagency collaboration on anti-trafficking efforts. It's great to be sitting here with other leaders from the administration that are committed to this fight, but it's also great to see activists on this issue who have been there from the beginning of what we would call the modern era. March of 1998, when President Clinton issued the first executive order on this issue since 1862. Thanks to those of you, Steve Warnoth and others, who were in the White House at that time, who worked on that policy, it set in motion something that really gave us, the Obama administration, something to build upon. The activities and the actions of the Bush administration, continuing that promise. This new anti-trafficking policy at USAID focuses on something that we desperately need in this struggle. As I look at the 194 countries around the world as we put together our report, what we see is the need for innovation. Right now, the U.S. State Department and USAID are working with partners around the world to support programs that we know work. Victim care, training and education, law enforcement training, shelters. We're going to continue to support those programs because they've done a lot of good. Now, in a way, this is a new approach. One could describe it as development with teeth. The notion that development sometimes also has to involve the application of rule of law, people seeing their abusers go to jail, bringing the law enforcement culture and the development culture together in a way that has not necessarily done before. I think during the campaign in 2008, you saw that when President Obama, then Senator Obama at Saddleback Church, not only put down a clear marker that traffickers have to be prosecuted, but also that we have to do things to prevent it from happening in the first place. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act minimum standards mandate tough prosecutions, and I was a prosecutor at one point in my career, but I can tell you that prosecutions alone cannot end this. We cannot prosecute our way out of a horrible problem like trafficking. The reality is, despite all of our efforts globally, there are about 4,000 to 6,000 prosecutions a year, and you've heard the numbers, up to 27 million. Nevertheless, I'm optimistic about our chances in this fight because researchers, caregivers, lawmakers, and sheriffs are coming up with new ways to bring this crime from the shadows into the light so that people can avoid enslavement, see their abusers brought to justice, and have a chance at the restorative care and the better life that they wanted in the first place. Innovations like what we've heard about with MTV, who's really looking at monitoring and evaluation as a way to scale out what they're doing on prevention. Innovations like what we're doing on slaveryfootprint.org, in which people around the globe are confronting the question, how many slaves worked to sustain my lifestyle? To ask the same question that Raj Shah asked about USAID's own procurement footprint and own policies. This new initiative holds such promise not just because it's forward-looking in ways that we address this problem around the world, but also because of the fact that Administrator Shah is willing to take that good hard look at himself and his agency. In the Quadrennial Diplomacy and Development Review, Secretary Clinton mandated that we strengthen our internal anti-trafficking efforts, to include ourselves on the annual trafficking report, to assess our policies and guidelines. If we're going to be the world's leader in fighting this crime, the first step is making sure that those who work for us and do business with us aren't out there making the problem worse. The State Department works hand in glove with USAID on this issue, and I'm hopeful that the new policy will strengthen that collaboration and make a real difference for those who endure slavery in the modern era. Because the commitment represented by those of us who are here today is more than a policy. It's a promise. It's the promise of emancipation. It's the promise of the 13th Amendment, the promise of freedom. It's a promise that was written in the blood of all of those who lived and died when slavery was legal in this country. And it's a promise written in the blood of those who died to end it. It's part of who we are as a nation. And I look forward to continuing this administration's work to deliver on that promise.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. What I'd like to do now, if I could, is just give formal introductions to the other three members of the panel, and then just to open it up. If you have a comment or question, just maybe prepare it now. But just going down the roster here, we have with us Carla Capel, whose official title is Senior Coordinator for Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment at USAID. And for those of you who don't know Carla, there's probably nobody here who doesn't by now. She has really reflected the commitments of this president, of the Secretary of State, of Raj Shah, of Don Steinberg, of the entire USAID 21st Century Culture in really putting women and gender at the center of USAID policy making and development decision making. It's really been remarkable to see one person's impact on an agency. Speaking of impact, the great Don Steinberg, the deputy administrator, who has to go around the world cleaning up after Raj and all the all the commitments Raj makes. Don I'm not so good at sticking to the talking points, but as a general rule, no greater friend to human dignity, really, above all. Nobody thinks more carefully and more deeply about the human consequences of U.S. decision making than Don Steinberg, and so we're blessed to have him really with us in the administration. And then finally, Sarah Mendelson, who's the Deputy Assistant Administrator at USAID within the Bureau for Democracy, Conflict, and Humanitarian Assistance. Sarah is a bulldog, as many of you know, and when she puts her teeth into issues as varied as atrocity prevention, civilian protection, elections in the Congo, human trafficking, open government, there's going to be an enormous transformation. And so we really have with us, I think, the people who put in the long hours and really go out of their way to try to change the system so that we have long-term downstream effects for real people in the world, and we're very lucky. So with that, why don't I just open it up if anybody has got a comment or a question. Again, bearing in mind this is a webcast, and it's a chance for people out there who aren't in the White House with us today to hear the back and forth with your great community and folks up here in official positions. So let me open it up. Yes, please, and don't forget to turn your mic, and if you could identify yourself, that'd be great.
Good morning. My name is Neha Mishra, and I'm the Senior Specialist for Migration and Human Trafficking Programs at the Solidarity Center, which is an international organization that focuses on worker and human rights around the world. So thank you for having us here today, and we're very excited about this policy for two reasons. And first of all, I think that we work very closely with the JTIP office, and notice I said JTIP and not GTIP, JTIP office and Ambassador Seydabaca's office, and have also implemented some USAID programs on trafficking in the past. And one of the things that I think is beneficial about seeing USAID this policy and coming more into this field is, and we've talked about this, Ambassador Seydabaca, is that we think that USAID has an opportunity to deal with some of the root causes more than the JTIP office can, perhaps in some ways. Although JTIP is very committed to it, I think resource-wise, USAID has more resources and ability to do that. And I always kind of talk about it as the concentric circles. You have trafficking in persons, and then outside of that, you have things like adherence to worker rights would actually help as a prevention of human trafficking. And so I'm just a little bit curious to hear a little bit more about how you plan on kind of integrating the second concentric circle. And for our purposes, we do a lot of work on immigrant or migrant workers, and there is a particular vulnerability of migrant workers to human trafficking, debt bondage, and other issues. And one of the things that we see in countries like Indonesia, Bangladesh, Nepal, Central America, where there's large numbers of migrant workers who go abroad, is that many times governments don't have a commitment to creating jobs where people live, and people are forced to migrate. And unfortunately, it's not always safe migration, and there's not always channels for them to do that, and there's vulnerability to trafficking. And so I saw that economic growth was one of the streams that you have, but I think that I'd be curious to hear a little bit about the second concentric circle, as I said. Thank you.
Rush.
Well, let me start, but ask maybe Don or Carla to help. I appreciate those points. I think we've at least by my observation, we've been too stovepiped even within USAID to say trafficking is a set of trafficking programs that are labeled as such and funded that way, and then we work only with the partners who do trafficking, and that's it, and we check the box, and that's really not good enough. So I don't know if this speaks precisely to what you're speaking about. When you mention Indonesia, Bangladesh, and Nepal, those are all countries where we have significant presence programs. They may be in agriculture, they may be in climate resilience, they may be in health, but they tend to reach very vulnerable populations. And the reach we have across the breadth of our work is far, far, far greater than the reach we have in our trafficking programs. So by asking our missions, as they develop what we're now calling country development cooperation strategies, in cooperation with the countries themselves, to lay out a 5-year strategy and to document as part of that their understanding of what's the baseline on trafficking, what's their goal, how are they getting there, we can start to use a much broader range of instruments and programs and relationships to tackle and address human trafficking. And it's not to say that the programs aren't important that are trafficking programs, but we tend to have much broader reach, and so it's just changing the mindset so that it becomes a more central part of everything we do.
Don.
Just to pick up on the themes that Raj raised, we recognize for USAID that there's a commonality between our traditional development challenges and the trafficking area. We have to address limited education opportunities, lack of employment, a weak social safety nets in these environments, issues related to tenuous rule of law, and in particular ethnic and gender discrimination. We have adopted this policy. We will have an implementation guidance document that will come out relatively shortly. And it highlights that there are 4 elements that we have to focus on. First, as Raj was saying, the specific programs for empowerment in the political, social, and economic arena of individuals who are vulnerable here. Secondly, the specific programs for creating a proper protection environment, whether that's legal, whether that's rule of law, whether that's prosecution. Third, walking the walk in-house, and we've talked a lot about that document that was issued a year ago, but we need to constantly do training for our own people and bring people up to speed. But perhaps equally important is the 4th area, and that's mainstreaming. So it's not enough for our protection people to be focused on this. As we're implementing the President's Global Health Initiative, we have to recognize that trafficked individuals and vulnerable individuals are in desperate need of assistance. As we're doing the Feed the Future for food security programs, we have to recognize that child labor in a lot of these environments is an everyday reality. Raj was referring to climate change, in addition to our democracy and governance programs. So it's as much, 2 concentric circles as it is 4 overlapping responsibilities, specific programming for empowerment, creating a protection environment, walking the walk in-house, and mainstreaming.
I think what I'll do is just, I'm sure everybody would love to comment on this because it's a sort of foundational question about how you do mainstream. What we'll do, just in the interest of time, though, is open it up for additional questions and comments. And I think what we'll do is maybe take 2 or 3, and that'll help discipline those of us up here as well. Madam Ambassador.
I am Ritva Koukuro. I'm Ritva Koukuro, the Ambassador of Finland. Thank you so much for bringing such a topic for discussion. This is highly important, and it is, like mentioned already, a very multidimensional problem also, which requires more attention than we actually have. So thank you very much also for the very good report from State Department, as well as this policy paper, which is very practical and very good to read. Actually, I will send it back home also, and I'm sure that our people are studying this very carefully. There are a couple of things I would like to agree, actually, and my comment is, I think this is, first of all, the mention that work starts at home is very essential. I think we couldn't point this enough even. What we have found in Finland that when we have started to tackle the trafficking issue in a more comprehensive way, and when we appointed ombudsman, who is from the government appointed, who has high legal possibilities as well, that this has helped to identify more specific the problems, bringing it on the agenda, and then do something as well. And then at the same time also to bring it into, for instance, in our international development activities, and look what we can do there in a very comprehensive manner. So our experience of having only a couple of years actually what we have had our ombudsman has been very beneficial. And there has been a very good cooperation, by the way, between the Finnish ombudsman with the US government also. Thank you for that. She was visiting last week here and had a good program. The other is, I think, the political will, really, and the government's will. We have a number of international conventions, and this is something which in my previous capacity as Undersecretary of State for Global Development Issues, I was constantly repeating in some of our statements abroad that we have the agenda, but we only have to implement it, and we have to have their political will. And we need here international cooperation, we need the NGOs on board, we need companies with their corporate responsible programs, and we need everybody. But therefore it is very good that we have these very practical tools also for our disposal, and I thank you very much for bringing these sort of practical tools. And I'm really thrilled about looking how we can do it in some of the areas or country base also. We do this also in some of our development cooperation, but we do also this work in the regional councils, for instance, Council of Baltic States. So it is really sort of home-based activities what you can do in your own neighborhood as well, and bringing people. And then I think the sort of comprehensive approach, how to have at home necessary players at the same table like we are sitting here today, and really in a comprehensive way of tackling the issues, but at the same time also when we are working outside of our countries, how to get all necessary people on board and have the action done. Training is one. Lastly, I think training is one which I think we couldn't pay even more attention. Last week when we had the couple of Afghanistan seminars and also the women in security, I think there again in crisis management, all those sort of activities which we have on board, I think we should mainstream also the trafficking issue. Mainstreaming is difficult, I have noticed it for years or so, and that is a challenging to any organization. How do we really follow up that mainstream ideas are really done, and there I think we can learn from each other a lot.
Great, thank you. Yes, sir.
Well, thank you again for this event today. My name is Samir Goswami. I'm with LexisNexis, and I have a question about the Code of Conduct. I remember reading it last year when it came out, and I was very impressed by how strong it was and how clear it was, and it certainly inspired some conversations internally in our company to see if we could do something similar just for our operations and our contractors overseas. My question is about enforcement of it. It's been, I think, out for about a year, which is a relatively small period of time, but have there been reports about contractors, about employees engaging in this kind of behavior that was prohibited, and what happens once those reports happen?
It's a great question, sir. Let's just take one more, and then we'll open it up here. Yeah.
Hi, Marina Colby, ECPAT USA. ECPAT stands for Ending Child Prostitution and Trafficking. And I guess good minds think alike, because my question was also about the Code of Conduct and its enforcement mechanisms, especially around the first point on USAID contractors and also subcontractors, grantees and sub-grantees. And I would love to hear more about the ideas to sort of like reach these actors down this chain. Mm-hmm. So once again, thank you so much for this long-awaited policy, and we look forward to helping you implement it. Thank you.
So let's start with the Code of Conduct response. Who from USAID would like to dive in? Sarah?
So thank you. I want to just acknowledge all the champions around the table and listening. This work is very much a network work. We can only combat trafficking networks if we're a really strong network. The Code of Conduct is, I would say, a work in progress. We have more training to do. The only way that it can become real is for missions who are in places that are particularly vulnerable to fully embrace this event today. And the policy, I think, is going to really help us take this to the next step. We have a working group that's been putting together a protocol for understanding, working with RGC to understand what our legal obligations and rights are in order to enforce this. We would like to be doing some work, and we've talked with Lou about doing something with Inspector Generals, the IGs for USAID, for state, for DOD, to really make sure that IGs understand how to investigate any kind of complicity. Because we know from the past that oftentimes their role is about auditing as opposed to investigating this crime. So we're optimistic that over the next 6 to 12 months, it will be fully embraced, and the policy, I think, really helps give it some leverage. But I think one of the goals of the policy is to make sure that it's not just the counter-trafficking champions that are in the room and in the agency who are self-identified, but people who are working particularly in conflict and post-conflict zones, that they see this as part of their regular job and have the tools and the understanding to be able to commit.
Could I
Yes,
I'll
please,
just
Raj,
add,
absolutely.
add briefly, and then I apologize that I have to step out. I want to just build on Sarah's last point that, it's very difficult is the answer on enforcement of this. But what we've basically tried to do is write it into contracts, ensure that it applies to subcontractors, which is especially on the security side, which I think is where people believe there's the greatest risk, and to make sure that our subcontractors are governed by a set of enforcement models in the field. So in Afghanistan, we're in a very deep dialogue right now with the Karzai government around exactly what that looks like as they stand up the mechanism for ensuring that the code of conduct is enforced. It also means that we take more responsibility to actually collect data on our subcontracts and to identify the individuals that are part of that, to do an appropriate level of screening, to ensure that we know who's receiving U.S. funds for, in most cases, security functions. So, it's not without controversy, and it's not easy, but we've been sort of making some steady steps. The point I would make is it does require real partnership with country enforcement mechanisms, and that's where, as Ambassador Sitibaka mentioned, the connection between development and enforcement becomes very, very tangible and very real. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Raj, and thanks for all you're doing. Ambassador.
I'd like to respond to our Finnish colleagues' intervention. Madam Ambassador, I very much appreciate your words. I think that what we've seen is that with the creation of the ombudsman position in Finland, that the response of the Finnish government has rapidly, I don't want to say turned a corner because you weren't doing a bad job to begin with, but has improved so dramatically that for us it was important to not just meet with the ombudsman last week when she was in Washington, but also to bring in counterparts from other parts of the diplomatic community here in Washington with the notion that countries from Chile to South Africa to Japan could be looking at the Finnish model as something that they might be able to take on board. That notion of the self-critical work that you're doing, it's what we're aspiring to do and what we hope that the policy that we announced today is representative of. But that self-critical work that Eva Baudet is doing on behalf of your government has very much improved the lives of trafficking victims in Finland. We'd like to bottle that and take it all over the world.
Okay, Carla, just a quickie because I want to try to get in.
Very quick. I just wanted to mention that I think in response to what the Finnish ambassador said, this issue of mainstreaming and how we integrate our efforts in counter-trafficking into the work we're doing on women, peace, and security, into the reform of our gender policy is a critical part of how we think we move this forward. That is, you do this by creating complementarity and synergy across the board, and then moving forward on all fronts and arming people through training, outreach, technical assistance, and information to be able to do the kind of integration that results in meaningful change in the way you provide development assistance, so that it's bearing in mind a whole range of issues that it didn't before. Because at the end of the day, USAID and the State Department and others are all about doing the best job that they can in whatever sector they're working in. And if you can make it relevant to the work they're doing in agriculture and economic growth, in any of the sectors in which we work, then they're going to respond in kind and really begin to implement in earnest.
Great, Carla. Thank you. Let's take one more batch of questions. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap at 11. Yes. And again, introduce yourself.
Good morning. My name is Andrea Bertone. I'm from FHI 360. And thank you very much for this new policy. Congratulations. I think one of the best ways we can address and prevent human trafficking is by improving gender equality and girls' and women's empowerment. And I appreciate Carla Coppell's comment about how we integrate at all levels of the development process. And this is, I think, a really wonderful new, maybe reinvigorated approach on the part of USAID to integrate and mainstream the anti-trafficking policy. And I'm wondering if you can just talk about, from the USAID side, what the actual mechanism might be for convincing some of our partners at the USAID mission level that we can incorporate anti-trafficking activities in work that we're already implementing, for example, in the DRC with gender-based violence programming. What is the mechanism that we can follow that may be put into place soon?
Great.
Thank you.
Yes.
My name is Cindy Dyer. I'm the Vice President of Human Rights at Vital Voices. And again, I want to echo everyone's thanks so much for this. This is wonderful policy, and we are so excited about it. My question actually follows up a little bit because I would like to know more information about your next steps for implementing the policy. What is the plan to make the policy keep its promise? And how can we, as NGOs, be involved and helpful?
We can't just stop with the rollout. We can't just. Sorry. Great. Last question.
Thank you. My name is Jesse Eves, and I'm from the organization World Vision. And I just want to echo all my colleagues here who are praising this policy. We're really excited to see this come out. I too have a question on mechanisms, funding on this, or following on what my colleagues have said here. Since, according to the policy, the missions are going to be doing the majority of the funding of the programs, be it in existing programs or brand new programs, what is the plan to coordinate with the State Department and JTIP in particular and their programs to ensure that there's no duplication beyond the Senior Policy Operating Group? What is the plan to ensure there's no duplication?
Great. So in our responses, if people could both respond to the three excellent questions and then any closing thoughts you have. Who'd like to start?
Sure. Very quickly, we coordinate very closely in terms of grants that are going on the ground, and we're working all the time to make sure that there are no surprises and that there's great dialogue. And I really have to just say it's been a true pleasure working with JTIP on this. We're hand in glove. In terms of the actual plan and mechanism, we have two concrete things that are coming out. This is one document. There'll be a field guide that is really unlike anything I've seen. Really helps the missions to understand how to apply the policy. We will have folks who are trained to be able to go out and help in terms of integration, understanding what that really means if you're doing a health or an education program or food security, and how to look for the opportunities to combat trafficking in those. We will be publishing annually an easily understood, this is what USAID is doing to combat trafficking. It'll take us a little while to get in cycle, but the idea is, together with partners and implementers, to be able to see at a glance how the policy is being reflected. In terms of mechanisms, DRC is a great example. We're talking right now with the mission director and Nancy Shalala, who is the security person on the ground, who is very involved in the code of conduct, on how to bring a little bit more centralized funding from USAID to the DRC mission. But in general, it's going to be really getting people excited in the missions to understand the large amounts of money they have for food, for health, for education, where the pieces are that they can contribute in terms of combating trafficking, and then placing a few strategic investments that come from the center.
Thanks, Sarah. Don.
I'd actually just like to follow up very quickly on what Sarah was saying about how we're working together to JTIP and USAID. One of the most important things that we do every year when we're looking at our grants, and both USAID in DACA specifically to its trafficking programs, and then JTIP have about $18 to $20 million that are specific trafficking pots of money. And we do the peer review process of the applications that come in, and USAID has been a very strong partner in that. That's one of the first places where we're able to deconflict what's going on. But what we want to do in the future is to go to the next step, which is to say USAID has this happening, so then we want to have targeted programs that can come in next to it, fill the gaps that each of us have, play to our various strengths as organizations. The other thing, of course, that we're doing is we're cross-pollinating to some degree, because even though I hate to see them go, some of my best people have been poached by my AID colleagues. And so having the JTIP alums that are in AID, I think actually helps bring us all that much closer together.
Great. Again, we're running low on time here, so Don and Carla, brief last
Just to
comments.
stress, we have not violated any trafficking rules in stealing his people over at AID.
He got promoted, so that's great.
Exactly. The question that you've all been asking, how do you ingrain this into the DNA of an agency? It's a very tough thing to do. The first thing you do is to remind people that all of their projects in health and education and housing and food security are not going to work unless these issues are addressed. So we have a letter of instruction we send to mission directors when they are beginning their operation. They're like our ambassadors, and it specifically targets issues related to gender equality, trafficking, et cetera, and makes that part and parcel of what we're expecting from our people. We also are hosting webinars with all of our missions to walk through these policies. We have a process where when our mission directors or our contracting officers come back, we highlight these issues in their training programs. Next week we are going to be announcing our new gender policy, where trafficking is very much front and center. The other thing you do is to put yourself out in a very transparent way. And so we wanted to issue this in part so that you will hold us accountable. And as you're holding us accountable, I want you to focus on 5 things. First of all, is what we're doing additive? Is it just repackaging old programs, or are we actually getting our act in gear? Secondly, is it measurable? Can we show that we're actually having an impact on the ground? Third, is it time-bound? By when are we going to achieve these results? Fourth, is it fully financed? Are we putting our money where our mouth is? And finally, who's accountable? Whose career will be enhanced by doing this, and whose career will be hurt by not doing this? And I want you, a year from now, when you look at, maybe someone's calling to endorse this idea. But a year from now, when we come out with our report on the progress that we've achieved over the last year, hold us accountable to that. Because again, this is a collaborative effort. And we haven't talked a lot about involving the women and the trafficked people themselves in this exercise. That's vital. We have a phrase we use, nothing about them without them. Yeah. And we know that we do not have a monopoly on good ideas, on resources, on ground truth, or on moral authority. So we want to work with you. We want to work with people on the ground, and again, hold us accountable.
Thank you, Don. Very, very last word, Carla. You're great. Okay, great. Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody around the table for all the work that they're doing in the private sector as advocates, in holding us accountable, in assisting those who've experienced trafficking in persons around the world in all kinds of ways, and to thank those of you who aren't with us today in person, but who really are the oxygen for this entire movement. The grassroots and grass tops attention to persons that many of you will never meet, is really inspiring for those of us who have the privilege of working in the U.S. government to try to combat this again, monstrous practice. The webcast is going to conclude now, but there's going to be a Twitter conversation that recommences, I guess, in about half an hour. And so for those of you at home who'd like to be part of that conversation, who didn't hear satisfactory answers to your questions or have other questions or comments, please go to hashtag pound WH Counter-Trafficking. So that's WH for White House Counter-Trafficking, and the Twitter conversation will resume. Thank you so much.